I'm Isaac. This is Aiden, David, and Kaylee. We're from the Solar Car team. We've got one more member coming, but he's just a little bit lost, so we'll give him a chance to get here. So Kaylee and David are on the business side of the team. So there's two main parts to the team before we get into any of the specifics. There's the business team and the technical team. Both teams are integral to the success of the team, but three of us are on technical, Kaylee's on business. So we're just going to wait for David before we get into business, and we'll skip ahead to the technical for the first part of the talk. So I think, Aiden, you're up first on Max.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah, I'll take the working with this.
Control now.
All right. So yeah, we're a solar racing team. We race solar cars. I'm pointing this. Maybe give it a click. You hit next.
We're not the ANU team.
Hey, Chuck. So.
Yeah. So well, anyway, we race solar cars across the desert in Australia. We start in Darwin, all the way down to Adelaide. We build the cars here, right here on the ANU campus. We've been doing it for probably about 5 years or what. We're moving on to our third car this year, and the next few weeks is going to be very exciting for us. So we're very hands-on. So yeah, university students, student-led team. So we run this ourselves. No, we don't have any academics or teachers sort of helping get money or design things. It's all us. Yep, sort of two sides to the thing. We've got business team, tech team, sort of our vision. So it's all about improving our education. We feel that we learn so much building these things, so much more that we learn in the classroom. Of course, that's important too. Oh, there we go. That one worked. Great. So David, maybe okay?
Oh yeah, events.
You want to talk a bit about this?
Sure. I don't know if I have anything to click through, but hi, I'm Kaylee. I am the events leader for Solar Team. Basically, the events team does exactly what it sounds like. We've run a bunch of events over the 2 years. The biggest events that we do are our sponsor benefits, when basically we get our sponsors and our other supporters and the team into a room together. We do kind of a cocktail dinner, and our aim is to share the experience of the solar car with the people who helped us to make it happen, I guess, which is really nice. We also do a lot of community outreach events. So we do lots of school outreaches, like this workshop was organised by the events team, and we are responsible for running team social events as well. So we kind of get the team together and give them an opportunity to hang out and chill when they're not crazily building a solar car, and which they do a lot when they're not crazily building a solar car, and yeah, give people an opportunity to get to know people in the team who aren't necessarily in their specific sub-team, who they might not get to work with on a daily basis, which is always really fun. Yeah, that's all the event stuff.
Next team up is sponsorship team. So basically, excellent. Right, so basically, the sponsorship team is responsible for getting all the funding for the team. So the team's only partially funded by ANU, and then the team also comes up with its own money from other sponsors. So our naming sponsor this iteration is Spirit Super. That's a contractual obligation. I'm obliged to mention it every time we talk about the cars. Excellent. So we generally need to raise over $500,000 to fund the creation of the car and transportation to events and giving our sponsors back the benefits. So in our eyes, we partner with companies like Tesla and Tindo Solar. So earlier last year, we went up to Tesla to their Sydney office, just basically say hi, get a little tour around, and get a little bit of help with our battery system as well. And then earlier this year again, the Summit team, Isaac, out here went down to Adelaide to encapsulate the solar cell. So they were basically responsible for building the solar cell. I'll let Isaac talk about that later. And so the opportunity is basically, as a sponsorship team member, you kind of get to interface a lot with engineering and tech companies. And so you get to make good connections with them, and then maybe if you're lucky and make really good connections with them, you might land a job way into the future. And so always useful to practice your soft skills like communication, negotiation, saying hi and bye to people in the business world. The other team that, spoilers, sorry. The other team that we have within the business team is marketing. So marketing, I like to put it, manages our front-facing everything. So apart from the events, they're responsible for our social media, our website. So follow us on all social, please. Shameless plug as well. I plug this every time we do this as well. Yeah, as well as the graphic design. So basically, all the graphics you see out here were designed in-house by us as well. And then we have a bunch of graphic designers too, basically come around, doing a really great job, honestly, between the two of them, putting out the team branding, the presentations, the uniforms, color grid. And yeah, and so marketing team has built sponsorship benefits, so like creating these videos. So if you check us out on our website, this is actually not a still image. This is a moving image of the car racing through the Australian desert. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm going to hand over to Aiden or
All right, mechanical. So, in my biased opinion, this is the best part of the whole. This is where we're making the car. That's what's the battery, the solar panels, and all that. But what you're seeing here, so this is the bodywork of the car. Of the last car that we built, the Supercharged 2. This one was designed by a previous member. My job this year is to design the new car's bodywork.
That's number 3.
That's number 3. This is the new one. So, and I should know that because I spent a lot of time staring at this.
Maybe a bit too much time.
Maybe. So a few differences between this car here and what you see cruising on the road. Cars you see cruising on the road, big engine in the front. You've got to see all these people sitting upright, leaning backwards, very comfortable and everything. What we're going for here is speed. Right? We want to go fast and we want to get there efficiently. So we've got all these streamlined shapes. These are called airfoils, designed by NASA in the 60s, and that sort of thing. So we're essentially, we've got a little driver that sits in here, and we put this pummel over their head, so all the air rushes over, disappears, leaves a very small weight. It's a very low drag vehicle. We call it a streamliner. We've got over here. So here's some of the components, other mechanical components in the car. Suspension, this is what keeps the car level and not bouncing all over the place. Brakes, very important. We drive fast, so we need to be able to stop fast as well. Steering, I think this design last time, obviously a bit of side to side. There's a few other developments we're doing with the steering of this car. A few secret things that we're trying to keep under wraps. So it's a bit more than just turning left and right. We've got a few other components that are moving with the wind, sort of like a yacht. Opening mechanism, Rob might be able to mention some of that later on. And yeah, putting all the electrical components in. So, click on, what do we got next? What do we do? So this is sort of a bit of a basic design process. This sort of can apply to other projects as well. First thing first, research. Spend a lot of time clicking around on the computer, working out all these shapes, what's good, what's not. Design. This is more time spent in front of the computer. Looking at some of these things here, sort of creating them and modelling them in 3D. So it's a lot of fun and takes a lot of time. Analysing our designs. This top photo here is part of the finite element analysis method. So this is essentially how do we know if something's going to break? We could build them and then sit there and break them all and see how strong is this part. We have to do that hundreds of thousands of times to see how optimized or how strong something is. So instead, we use a computer. We build our little shape on the computer. We break it down into lots of little cells, and we see how it bends and how it breaks. So we know how strong it needs to be, I suppose. Fluid dynamics. That's this bottom photo here. So this is all the streamlines of going over a car. So we can tell how slippery it is going through the air. The other things, engineering drawings. So we have to put all these technical drawings together so we can make the car. And yeah, that's the next part, making it. Manufacturing, so cutting down aluminium, that's the machining, laying up carbon fibre. So it's an ultra lightweight material that we use for bodywork. All right, Rob, do you want to mention a bit about your opening mechanism? And,
Hi, Roland. I'm also from the mechanical team. Yeah, so here are some of the drawings from CAD we've made. So we have to make the whole car basically CAD first before we can make it in real life. And that allows us to very quickly and easily, comparatively speaking, change the requirement based off results as Aidan mentioned. So a few sort of subsystems here. We've got the rear suspension and the motor wheel. So the motor is actually inside the hub of the wheel rather than your conventional engine and drive shaft and all that. It's all in the wheel, and that makes it a lot more efficient. Typical combustion engine, maybe 35% efficient in terms of the energy that's in the petrol or diesel to moving forward, whereas this is about 95-97%. So it's a lot more efficient. The downside is maximum power about 17 horsepower, so a lot less than a typical car, but very efficient whilst doing it. We've got the front suspension, so it's a fork design, a bit like a bicycle in some regards, just a little bit more beefed up. We can do this because the cars are very light, and that's the other half of the equation in making it go fast, is it's a lot less than a typical car. About 200 kilos rather than a ton. Now over here is part of my prime joy, which is the opening mechanism, and this is really comes down to, we present these as separate subsystems, but really they all interact to make one fast car. So we have to work with electrical to make sure all their components can fit, that they won't rattle about and all the electronics are great, suspension. And the other half is the solar array, so to maximise the amount of sun power we can get. Whenever we're not driving, whenever we're stopped, we can tilt the whole top of the car up to point the sun, which increases the power efficiency in the morning and in the afternoon when the sun isn't directly overhead. So yeah, whenever we're stopped to change drivers, or in the afternoon or right in the morning, or if something happens, get a flat tire or whatever, we can open that up, get more sun. It also means we can have a very easy access to all the internal components. The previous one, we had to kind of lift the whole top shell up with about 4 people, and I can tell you from experience that wasn't a lot of fun, including heating in 35-degree heat. Yeah, so actually making the stuff, which is what we're doing right now, is a lot of time-consuming but very fun. First of all, we've got to do these sort of engineering drawings that defines all the dimensions and shapes, so that we or whoever else is making it can easily understand our designs. And then on the left there, we've got 2 of the other people, mechanical members. Right on the left-hand side, milling, so taking a big block of aluminium and with the mill, shaving it down to make one of these components. In the center, we've got laying up some carbon fiber. So mostly carbon fiber done by sponsor of ours in Sydney, but we also go up there and sort of learn about and make some of the components ourselves, which is really exciting. And something you might learn about, but actually applying it in real life, is so much more rewarding.
Go one more.
There we go. So I guess last thing I mentioned is when we use the math and physics. I don't actually study engineering. I study physics and software engineering. But I can certainly vouch for the fact that physics does provide a lot of transferable skills. And the solar car and other student projects can sort of allow you to expand outside your degree to other fields that you also might be interested in. So whilst we've sort of mentioned we do a lot of stuff in the computer, there's a lot of, all of that needs to be backed up by our mathematics. So there's a bit of a invisible thing down here, which is some force calculations. That finite element analysis Aidan mentioned is only as good as the math and the loadings that you've provided. So we've got to work out when the car goes over above, how much force is actually being provided in what direction to each of the components of the suspension, steering, the chassis, and all the other parts of the car. Another one is the opening mechanism, so 3D motion. That mechanism sort of has to rise up, has to be able to clear the roll hoop, and then tilt over sideways. So we use a 4-bar mechanism for that, and so I can certainly mention that working out the geometry and positioning to do that is not something you can simply do by trial and error. You have to sort of work out the geometry of that and the relationship so that it will open the desired way. There's also a fair bit of data analytics, I'm sure the electrical guys can talk more about. With data, we can optimize all sorts of parts in the car. So that's another sort of route. So, hand over Dave and Isaac.
Just before David jumps into battery things, are there any quick questions for Rob before we move on? Obviously, we'll be around later for questions as well. Maybe.
Chassis. So the chassis is the sort of structure of the car in the shape. So that's in ours. It's a big piece of carbon fiber, and that's what we.
Yeah, go back. Keep going. There you go.
So basically, most of that is the chassis of the car. Yeah, as I say, it's the shape, the outside shape, which is very important for aerodynamics, as David said, but also inside of it, there are sort of beams that provide the structure, so sort of flat parts that are very strong. It's foam and solid carbon fiber. Yeah. As a
Very good
least-
question.
I'm sure David could talk about that. From an aero perspective, any ventilation is bad because it's increasing the amount of aerodynamic drag. So we try to minimize as much as possible. There is no air conditioning for the driver. There is minimal airflow. The more airflow to the driver means the worse job that the mechanical does. Let little cracks and that get through.
Basically, it's a constant fight between me and Rob for how much
It
airflow I can get.
is.
That's probably a good jumping point. Yeah, I'll jump on to electrical now. So electrical, the easiest way to sum it up is we work on anything that has a current. So anything in the car which has any electrical components. And the way I like to describe it is we are given problems, mostly by the mechanical team, and have to find a solution. But also, like, not only that, but I reckon the best thing is we play all the new toys. We get all the cool stuff. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm working on the battery for the whole car. Without it, like, you've got a really expensive paperweight with 3 wheels. So pretty important, and also the cooling for that battery. So a lot of what I do day to day is material analysis, like looking at what material I want to put in. So at the moment we have drops material which is not suitable, so it's finding what else could I do. And there's lots of individual, almost like math equations, lots of individual problems you can solve, hundreds every day. So just a general run through of what some of our team members do. So we've got some of our team members on the PCB and the control systems. So we get, in basic terms, creating the pre-press a button on the car, maybe turn it on, it will actually turn on, that kind of thing. Then we have solar. Solar?
Yeah, sure. That's your battery though, right?
Yes, oh, sorry,
No.
explain it really quick. Yeah, this is my battery. It's crazy because you've got about 50 mils of pipe to play with, and you've got to make a battery which can drive all the way to Sydney in one charge. So it's pretty impressive. It's the same. It's approximately the same design as you see in like a Tesla or any range of other electrical car, and yeah, it's like, I think the current cost is about $15,000. So it's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll jump on to solar.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just briefly go over the solar array. So we've got a couple minutes left and then we'll take questions. But here we've got a schematic sort of drawing of the solar array. So you can see our car has 256 individually soldered, placed, looked after, cared for babies on our solar car. So that is really what gets us going. I would say that David's, without a battery, as long as the battery isn't charged, the car's still not going anywhere. So my solar array is the face of the car. So it's what you think of as a solar car. So we have 256 cells, but each of them, they're kind of dumb as an individual. So what we need to do is we need to draw the maximum power out of those solar cells we can at any one time. And this changes based on lighting conditions. So I don't know, I'm going to assume you guys have done a bit of electronics, so you understand like current and voltage and how that applies to power. So if we turn current by voltage, you get power. So we need to maximize that power output, right? That's maximum power to the battery. So what we can do is we can look at the graph of the current coming out of the solar cell and the voltage coming out of the cell. And what we need to do is we need to draw the maximum current and the maximum voltage from the solar cell at any one point. So obviously that's a lot of intense algorithms and maths, and that's what the MPPTs do. So we've got 2 MPPTs, maximum power point trackers, and they look after each half of the car. So what's really important for an MPPT is that if we have an overcast day, or there's shade on parts of the solar array, or there's different lighting conditions, we need to be able to still draw the maximum power out of that solar array. So that's a really important part of the solar array. Without that, it just would be like a lump of heating silicon. So we actually need to draw that power out. So that's the basic rundown of the solar array. Obviously, we need to look after the cells ourselves. So we order the cells, and then we need to manufacture the array ourselves. So that's what the sponsor Tindo is really great for. They're Australia's only solar panel manufacturer. We go down to Adelaide once every 2 years to build our solar array there. So we have to bring the cells, which come in a box about that big of 150 cells. We have to build those by soldering each individual cell together in a string for each of these modules. So we have about 30 modules, and that creates our whole solar array. So are there any questions for David and I about the electrical side of things?
How fragile?
Oh yeah. It's like if you had a piece of glass and then you made it like 1 mil thick. So that's like 1/10 of a centimeter thick. And then you had a piece of glass that had to produce extreme amounts of power at about 25% efficiency. So that's sort of fragility we're working with. So it's really, really important. Yeah. Any questions for David? Yeah, so they actually flat pack them. So there's like a piece of paper between each cell, and then 150 cells actually fits into about a box that size. And then we have 3 boxes of that, and we stack them in a box about this big with that much foam in between. So, and then you just have to carry it really carefully.
Because they're about $50 a cell, aren't they?
15.
15.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it just always produce max power as long as it's light?
Yeah, so absolutely. So the way that the solar cell generates current is through electrons being excited by the light and moving up into a band gap. So that produces different amounts of voltage and current. And so if we have less photons coming into the solar cell, we're going to have less power being generated. So we have to figure out at what point the voltage and current correlate with our maximum power. Yeah.
So are the solar panels used on there, they're like more or less efficient than like just the normal solar panels we have on like your roof or something?
Yeah, absolutely. These are the best solar cells, or silicon solar cells that one can buy. So they're a specific type of solar cell. They're called Interdigitated back contact, IBC cells. So the ones in your house, or the ones over there, some down here, they're probably aluminium, that surface field, or they could be PERC. So what they do is they have, you can see the silver lines, they have contacts on the front and rear side of the cell. So they have positive and negative on the different sides of the cell. Whereas these ones, to have the maximum efficiency, they actually only have contacts on the rear of the cell. So the whole front surface is purely for generating electricity. So they're the most efficient silicon solar cells.
I think the difference is about 7% you have on an average roof, or just if you go out and buy a commercial solar panel, where it's about 15.
Yeah, so ours are about 25%.
Oh,
And the only
25.
and then a traditional one is about 17%.
How about that?
Yeah, cool. Any other questions? Otherwise,
Any general questions about the race? What we do?
How many people are in your fight team?
Sorry, what was the question?
How many team members are there in fight?
Good question. Anywhere between 35 and 40. Off the top of my head, I'm not too sure at the moment. But let's go with 37. Somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so there's about 37 of us, so we split across the 2 teams. And then, yeah, as we said earlier, we're responsible for building and funding and marketing the whole car and coming out to events like these. So, good segue. I'm assuming some of you, not most of you, are going to come to ANU in the near future, or planning to. If you don't, that's okay. But if you are here and if you do come here, please apply for the team. We would love to have you on the team, and we think it's a really good experience. We're obviously biased because we're on the team, but we think it's a really good experience for kind of students to apply their knowledge. What you're learning here today, and like your statics mechanics, as well as your electronics, are directly applied within the car as well. So it's, to me, it's a really good way to apply what you're learning and kind of reinforce that as well. And also really looks good on your CV if you want to go get a technical job later on as well. So, couple quick thoughts about that. Yeah. Thank you. How much time do we have?
Pretty much like only 2 minutes. That's pretty much perfectly timed. Just one thing I wanted to mention. So yeah, I got the name right. He was actually part of the H course, same as you guys, in 20. Help me out.
Graduated 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then you've gone through to ANU and yeah, now you're part of this team. So, yeah, it is definitely possible for you guys to be part of this team one day. Now, I was wondering if you could do a super quick version, so maybe only 30 seconds each, so speed run. So it's kind of like a small series of questions. What degree are you studying? How far through are you? And how does this contribute to you going to where you want to end up? Does that make sense, those three questions? So it's kind of like, how does this all fit into your personal story? So if we can do like maybe 30 seconds each. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, all right. So I'm studying mechanical engineering and renewable energy engineering. I want to be building cars in the future. I came to ANU and saw this team, applied, and I've learnt so much from it. It's just phenomenally different to what you learn in the classroom. And as David said, I think it's really important for reinforcing knowledge.
I'm David. I'm first year. I joined the team as soon as I could. I was at an event kind of like you guys, and the team gave a presentation. I was like, "Oh, that sounds pretty good." I found the team was really good for in the engineering degree I'm doing. It's not as much hands-on as I was looking for, so I can come and do this, and then I find this almost more fun than my degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I did physics H course here, same with you guys, and then I graduated in 2019 and went to do engineering at ANU. Really loved it. I heard about the team through BTN way back in like 2008 or something, and really loved the idea of racing a solar car. So my degree, I'm hoping to focus on electrical engineering, looking to work in photovoltaics. And through the team, I've actually met academics, which I've now set up research projects with. So it's a really great opportunity to also talk to academics that work at ANU. At ANU, because it's a research university, we have such a great opportunity to talk to people who are actively working on this sort of technology and bringing it to the mainstream market. I'm not saying we don't do that as much, but it's really great to work with people who are in this industry. So I've been able to help actually work on improving the manufacture process for IBC cells with a research team at ANU. So there's some great opportunities that come out of the team as well.
I'm also David. I'm a final year engineering student. Where I see my future going is I'm finishing up my honours thesis at the moment. I'm going to go apply for a PhD. How the team's really helped me, I think, is separately is given me an opportunity to kind of push and develop myself outside my comfort zone. So that's what I was really looking for when I first joined the team.
You already know that I'm Kaylee. I'm doing a double degree. I'm doing engineering, research and development, and mathematical sciences. So I'm here for 5 years, and I'm in my first year at the moment. I'm the same as David. I joined the team straight away. I knew that I wanted to be in this team. And at some point in the future, I would really like to be running my own business. So my role in the business team is really helpful because I'm learning heaps of skills in project management, how to work with a team, how to manage a team, and how to work across different, I don't know if you could say different engineering disciplines, but how to work with different sub-teams within the team.
I'm Robin. I'm in my third year of double degree in software engineering and science, major in astrophysics. And I think this is, I also joined the first year because I thought it was the coolest thing ever to be able to build your own car, basically. I think it's the main thing sort of I found got out of it is a lot of skills and the opportunity to work with experts in their field. So Aiden and I have worked with aerodynamics engineers who used to work with Williams Formula 1 and things like that. And so being able to get that knowledge from them is just incredible. In the future, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing, but I think this project really helps sort of steer me towards that really practical base. Bringing in some of the other skills I agree to a sort of practical base of engineering.
So thank you very much for that. I know you actually have to rush off to go somewhere else, but thank you so much for your time to talk to everybody. Can we give them another round of applause? Right. So our next presenter is actually here as well. If you guys want to start packing up and everything, thank you very much. So,
my name's Akil. I thought it would be interesting to answer the questions that you just heard from the other team, so you get a bit of context of where I am relative to them, which is I'm much further on. I'm a PhD dropout in nuclear physics. Let's just start that way. And it really fits into my entrepreneurial vibe that I've got going right now, and I really kind of like that. So I've studied physics for about 10 years already. And now I'm at a point where I founded my own company with two other of my friends that you'll see in this talk here, that also study physics and doing their PhDs, all here at ANU. And I thought because I had never actually have done a talk like this was actually not really about anything other than really myself. I was always going to call this the physics of vanity in a way, because it's really just going to be talking about myself. But I'm going to be going over a little bit of the time that I had in how I moved through physics, why I was attracted to physics. And then actually what it was like to found a company and start a company, and what some of the projects that we did in the very early days of our company. So our company is now 3 years old now. I'm just going to show you the stuff which is just prior to that. So I want to actually go to another slideshow that I did this in 2017, this slideshow. And as you can see here, for National Youth Science Forum, which I don't know if you can go into next year or this year or something like that.
I can.
Yeah. Okay. So if you can, I highly recommend it. And I thought it would be cool to mention, start here because it'll be interesting. So yeah, just a bit about me. I'm a second-generation immigrant. I was born in Darwin. There was no hospital. I was actually born in Jabiru, which is in Kakadu National Park, and there's no hospital there. But I moved into Darwin. So go to the next slide. I didn't study physics in grade 12 at all. And back then, I was doing my PhD in nuclear physics, experimental nuclear physics, with lots and lots of cables. It's the same sort of electronics and sort of setups that you use in CERN, in particle physics, which is what this talk was about. Yeah. My favorite flavor of milkshake is strawberry. I love the color pink since I was a kid. I really love it. And also, I'm a geek of all sorts. I love nature. This is a giant tree. Visual art. This was a collaboration I did with a street artist. That was an opportunity that I had here doing my PhD. I think it's always important to be able to collaborate on those sorts of things. And musical theater. Kinky Boots. Highly recommend everyone sees it. So yeah. Oh, this is it. Okay, yeah, cool. This is actually where I wanted to get to for that set of slides, because I mentioned this in 2017, and I looked at it when I was making these slides just today. This is actually really the crux of it. Physics is absolutely part of my identity. It really has changed how I perceive the world, and the reason why I've actually done everything, like in terms of like why I studied these degrees and what I was hoping to get with physics, was just because I'm always doing what I'm finding fun, and that includes starting the company. And I'm applying the same sorts of things to that there, and I still do it today. So that's like over 10 years. Yeah. Go to the other slides.
So switch.
Yep.
Got it. Yep.
And then we're all done with that. So now I can handle it. All right. So this is, I guess, just going to be a whole heap of pictures because I just put these together. And I think this is the first day which we really kind of started our company before we even had a company. So one thing that PhD students do really, really well is procrastinate. Really, really well. Like, I don't know if this is just all students. I've ramped it up to the next level in my PhD. So this is my co-founder Prithvi and Mahasan. That's me there. And it's a classic example of how we look when we're working together. Prithvi's talking, Mahasan's listening, and I'm just stressing the hell out. Just anxious. This was at GovHack in 2017, which GovHack is running again this year, and I highly recommend it. And what it is that it's an open data hackathon that Australian government puts up. They just have all of their data sets, and they want to be able to show that they have value in actually having these data sets and what value they can provide to the public. So because they don't have that expertise internally, they basically outsource it at the return on investment for the people who are doing the work, us, pizza, like me doing this talk now. So it's the same sort of thing. Same things are going on and on. And it's a lot of fun because you get to really start to apply what you know in an abstract, complex way to actual real life problems. You can kind of see how it works. And I'll be talking about all of the projects that we did in the various set of hackathons towards the end here. And so there's a lot of like crunching and grinding on a computer in here. And I think one of the things that I'm very grateful for is my computing skills. The way I got through my physics degree actually was to be able to like make a computer do my assignments for me. I found that a lot easier than actually doing the assignments myself, and that kind of made me land onto a very valuable skill set by accident. And so I highly recommend that you really consider your computing skills and actually trying to think of them on that meta sort of cognitive level when you're solving problems. And really that would help you in your research career if you ever go into research as well. So that's like going from being a PhD student just came to being essentially an entrepreneur person. Was just like giving talks and stuff and this and that. So this over here, I was just giving a pitch at Sibrin. This was shortly after that in 2017. And Sibrin is the Canberra Innovation Network, where they have small companies and small businesses, and they try to like help bolster that sort of community and help you start your own business. We actually didn't really find that kind of fit our particular model, because what we are is a services-based company, in that all we actually sell is the fact that we're really smart. That's it. We don't have any products. And Sibrin is really good if you have a product. If you're an engineer, it works really. If you're building a thing, it's really great. And like they got like accelerators for that. And there are a lot of things that can really help you in that way. So really, what we found is that we weren't able to settle on a single sort of idea of ours, or we didn't really want to commit to one. Maybe that's just us procrastinating again. But it's really kind of turned us into a services-based company, but now we are starting to develop our own products, and going to be doing that later this year. I can get to that at the end. So one thing, whenever you're like, if you ever are going to be giving a talk or something, and it's amazing, you just do this. All this was the argmax of this song. That's it. And I just pointed at this and I said, so then we just optimize and solve this. And with that, I just impressed an entire room of people. So it's something, I guess, really simple algorithms are very, very powerful. So our company is really, it leverages machine learning, because one of the reasons why I moved out of physics was I kind of recognized the frontier of science was moving towards artificial intelligence. I'm still doing nuclear physics now. I think it's very important, but it's an emerging field. So being an emerging field, we have opportunities to apply this in the real world. And that's very important to me. So we won that GovHack, and that was the very first competition we won. And that was very, very exciting, because we did not expect to win, because it was a chaotic mess, just like this talk I'm giving. So it's very much on brand. So this person here is a friend of mine, Mayank. So Mayank is now working in Google in London, in DeepBrain actually, which is really cool stuff. So we kept doing these competitions because we were procrastinating on our PhDs. We just kept doing them. Every single one that came up, we just kept winning. We just kept winning. And I think the key aspect to that was really going back to this picture here, this thing here. Have you ever sat down with your friends and done a physics assignment and just been stuck? That's what this is. All that there is us. We took over the entire room. People kind of like just could not be around how much space we were taking. And I think that sort of energy, in order to be able to solve a problem, is really what we need to be able to tackle these data problems nowadays. And in industry, that's really what they're looking for. And it really aligns with that sort of go out there and actually do provide some sort of value, which is very important in business. So then eventually, like, we decided we should probably found a company, because people wanted to start throwing money at us after they gave us awards. And we needed a vessel to do that. So then we founded Form in 2018. And this was crazy, because the three of us have never had a real job in our lives. And it was very, very humbling and interesting, but it's something that I think is really important and good character growth for me and everyone else that was involved. So I now am quite passionate about helping people get over the really silly questions that are like, how do you actually do this? And I think that's something, when it comes to the difference between being able to like sell yourself and have a company yourself, which is all we've done, really. All our company is we only hired our first person this year, which is very exciting, but a vessel for us to be able to sell our consultancy services. That's it. To the difference in paying your own paycheck versus going to somebody else and letting somebody else do that administrative work. So it's only just a little bit of adulting if you just think about it. That's the difference. But then you get to really, and what's important to us is to be able to make it and do the work that we really want to do. So in founding form, it kind of is like, for a while, we had no offices at all. Like, it's just like, cool, we got this vessel. We are like PhD students, kind of doing our PhDs a little bit part-time. This is on a train in Sydney, and we're talking about accounting stuff, and we're just so confused. How does this count? How does accounting work? And what we learned later after we got accountants and I started calling them and annoying them so much, was like, Akil, don't worry, just do the thing, just move the thing. So these things, I guess, maybe that overthinking that really helped us do all the physics kind of really went the wrong way around when it comes to business, where it's kind of just like almost like the Wild Wide West in a way in industry. But really being able to find that balance between the two is how we've been able to be a very successful company. So we absolutely couldn't have done this. This is now in 2020, so this is recent. Without the essentially incubation of our research school director of physics. This is Professor Tim Senden. So Professor Tim Senden, he is so supportive of us even though we're all PhD dropouts there, he's really kind of just taken us under the wing, and we're almost like a different example or a different pathway of what you can do with physics. I should also say, though, Ricky is going to finish their PhD. They're going to finish their PhD. So we're not all dropouts. And it's really, I think, an important thing to be able to recognize, actually, how good of a sort of environment that we have here in physics at ANU that I think is very different to other physics departments and physics schools. We are able to recognize you can't just be a crazy mad scientist. That's not going to work in the modern world. That's not going to really be able to get you a job that you want anyway. There's no way you're getting tenure. I'm sorry. It's just not happening. So you have to really be able to bring your own value in. I think it's important. And there are avenues, and everyone's supportive of each other there. So we were given some office space. This was our first office space, which was so exciting. Now we're no longer on a train. And my laptop's still there. I'm still only working on a laptop and stuff like that. And we kind of like were cohabitating with grand challenges at ANU that we kind of just sit there in the corner. We just kind of like do our own little thing all the time. And then they just told us that they wanted the space. And then we got another office space in the Research School of Physics now. And this is essentially a meeting room that we are now fitting 4 people into. So this is an old photo now. I wish I could get a new photo. They're all on my social media. I just put these all off my Facebook, really. So this is kind of where we are actually just doing this. All you need are a few laptops and some desire to actually take on some problems. So we still do enter hackathons, but now I guess this was the last one where we went to an event and we won, and just you can really kind of see the difference in how excited I was versus here I am just so grateful. Really, there's just an utmost amount of gratitude for, I guess, how things have unraveled over 3 years. Just being able to follow this journey of really just kind of doing what's fun and important and aligns with our values. I'm wearing the same coat as well. So this is actually straight from our website as well. So a little bit more about like what we kind of do and how we actually got there. And you can kind of maybe see where the overlap is of what I said in terms of also being in physics as well. So it says on the first goal, our goal, we want to solve complex problems that have real world impact. That kind of also is the fact that we've got the attention span of a goldfish and we want to do lots of things that were around us in our environment and we just want to do stuff. Like it's just exciting, So we want to be able to do that. One of the things though that we really believe in is trying to make the ethical decision the economic decision. And that's something that is very, very difficult to do. But it's something that we hold on to as a company, and we utilizing our, I guess, knowledge and education and the emergent field of machine learning, we can actually try to provide that arbitrage between I can give you something that is going to be better for the environment, or it's going to be better for social outcomes in some way. It's going to make things more democratic. But it's also got to be easier and better for you to use and cheaper. And that's something that we just always really try to believe in. And that's kind of working out for us. So we can see that we've, 3 physics PhD candidates and background in data science and computer science. So my co-founders are theoretical physicists, and also I am an experimental nuclear physicist, so I'm really into the data munging. And we started doing stuff in resources, healthcare, and transport. And now I'm going to go over like some of our earliest hackathons. Now, these aren't any of the projects that actually have turned into commercial projects. They're all under commercial in confidence, unfortunately. But these are also, I thought, were more appropriate because these were the fun ones that kind of founded our company as well, and have that kind of, starting to understand how we're actually applying our data analytics and how we actually twist taking some sort of problem that we see in the real world, how we apply mathematics and transformations and recognize all of the factors, which is basic sort of physics, right? And model it and provide something with a little bit of human intuition and knowledge that it's providing value to people with economics. So Express was the one that we won the first GovHack for, which was the crazy things on the wall. And now I actually just copied the slides from all the slideshows, so the first few ones, and you're going to see that for all of these things, we followed the same formula with our slides and our pictures, and just kept working. It's very funny. So this one was called Express, and we won the Future is Unwritten sort of bounty from the ACT government in GovHack 2017. And that was because they wanted to have city planning, and the trams were about to go in. So they wanted to know, I asked the question, can we make the transport network system better with just code? And of course, we just visualize, model, and optimize, which is pretty much on that boundary of engineering and science. We are not yet at the point where we actually know what we're doing, we're building a thing. We have to kind of do that translation of, we really are a research company now, and we do research translation now. And data science is a big one. And data science is probably going to be a huge potential avenue for you to get into if you're going to continue in physics. And that really is visualize, model, optimize. That's it. So one of the things is that we basically thought we can make the best of what you plan to get. That's it. That's all it was. So by simply taking that key concept of, optimize, and just thinking of the words ontologically and entomology, we can just apply it to that real world and find a way where we can actually think that this is going to provide them some economic value. So let's see if this plays. Cool. So one of the other things is live demos really work at these competitions if you ever want to do them. Hopefully this plays.
Just checking, do you need sound?
Maybe. Not for this one. Oh, look, here we go. It doesn't matter. This one doesn't need sound. The other ones will.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
So here we have like all of the black dots moving stuff around, and basically we made a transport network simulator, and the idea was to measure all of the buses moving around and then put in some sort of like a change of route, being they're not allowed to move here, and potentially model how they'll flow around. Have some particle flow model or something like that. So the way that we solved this actual hackathon over this weekend is that we just went through all the academic research papers, and we just read them and just read the math, and we just found out what to do, and we tried to apply it straight away. And we made a heat map for this as well, which is kind of cool. You see buses moving around, and all of these are the sort of skills that you'll gain by doing physics in university. So you need to visualize data, put it on the thing, and just be able to do it really quickly. Because when you're doing crazy experiments that are very expensive, you have to be able to see what you're doing now. So this was over here, when we're just like moving the things and the buses don't have any delays. And over here, we added a statistical model of a delay based on the number that they got from their data. And then by applying that, you can see that there's always congestion. It's just like there are buses everywhere, rather than buses moving about and fizzing about. So that's a really good example of applying sort of physics sort of thoughts and skills. Why is my experiment not making sense? Is basically it. So then we did this, and we were able to get tap on, tap off data. And this actually turned into the first sort of time where we were actually trying to collaborate with government. It's not actually really that much more interesting, so I don't know why it's not, it doesn't really matter. Oh wait, it is moving. It's just not really interesting at all. Everyone just goes to the city. You know? Like, that's it. So this turned into our first collaboration with the ACT government. So the next thing we did was power systems as a service, and this was like another hackathon, and as you can see, we just copied the same thing as last time. Just kept following this formula. So if you want, you can even see that this slide looks the same as well. It's basically, how can you make people see through the data and visualize it so they can do better? And this is just all basic physics skills, really. I want to, here, let's view this one. I'm going over time. Hopefully I can go over time, we'll see. I'll start a bit later. So yeah, make a pretty picture, show like there's like power distributing and point to point. And this whole idea was to be able to find out where we could actually place, if we place the battery somewhere, then how would it change the system, which is exactly the same as the last one, right? It's exactly the same. If we place the tram line somewhere, how does it change the rest of the agents, the movement of all of the system? That's it. And to be able to recognize that abstraction is something that really is a physics sort of skill. This is a completely different one where we did, and this turned into our first major contract. And this is computer vision, where we literally draw a skeleton over somebody with a webcam. And this is to be applied in a telehealth situation. So this actually, from this hackathon here, which Mahasan there was able to get this like code running on the bus trip up to Sydney. Then we were there, and it was a one-day hackathon. It turned into a $3 million CRCP grant that CoView won, that we worked with, and we're still working with CoView now. And that, I think, is just a great example of, you know, just making sure that you're really working on your networks and showing what you can do. Just go out and try things and apply things. And that really worked out quite well for us. I think I have, like, if I can play this. This is another example. Yep, starting right here. Anyway. So you can't really hear it that much, but basically, live demos always will win something if you're ever doing something. So this was a bit of the chaos of this sort of like in-between period of us not really being a real business in some sense and doing all of these hackathons, stuff like that, not really having products. But it's showing that, I think that's really important, is that what you can do as just, you know, a team of physicists in a weekend, and how you can potentially solve problems, and how you can actually totally do it. I think that's something that's really important, right? So that's the CEO of CoView that's reporting now, who is amazing. She's one of our mentors. She's like doing quite well now, which is good. So yeah, we won first place for that one as well. Oh, yeah. Okay. I recorded this recently on my Instagram because we're actually still working on this project, and now it's like deployed in things. You can see actually how dynamic and how much faster it is now. So the idea here is that when a person has gotten a total knee replacement, they have to be able to move their knees at least 2 degrees per week. So with a simple webcam, I could even do it over here, like on a webcam, right? You would sit down next to the computer, and there'll be somebody, a physiotherapist there, and you just get them to like try and move their knee as much as possible and see how it goes. And we'll be able to measure the angles from that. And it was actually phenomenal that like we got the person we were working with, they are very knowledgeable. She has commits in Google, in Chrome, in Google Chrome. And it was really, the only thing that they didn't know was how do you get the angle from that point, which was simply just like a tan theta. Like, you know, that was it, of those two angles. And that's really, it's incredible that. So I guess this was like the last sort of project I want to go over, which is very, very, very different. because really what this has got to do with is it was more about how we can connect with people, and it's showing a bit more of like that ethical side of our company as well as I think what's really important, not only as our skills as being a technologist to be able to know how to do technical things, but also how we can apply that to real human problems by listening, basically by listening. So what actually happened with this problem is that this was at Health Hack, and what we actually happens in today's world in hospitals is that we identify that there are people that are of cultural and language diverse sort of backgrounds that require an interpreter, and then once they get an interpreter, we just then stop. We don't really do much more. We say, okay, they've got an interpreter, and if they can't get an interpreter, then too bad. Or if they're going away from that, then after they're like gone away from their doctor's appointment, that's it. So what we did is that we just did this, put together all of the technologies that we know, that we've learned over the years, and then made a system that just makes a translated version of their appointment. And I think I've got the video here as well. So the important part, I guess, of this was
2 degrees of separation. Everyone has actually in this that we surveyed today was actually connected with somebody who might have experienced this problem. So if we could please just send a SMS to SWE here. So it automatically populates based on the database from the patient. If we could send an audio accessible message there, Prithvi. And yep. And let's just send a text message here. Great. So if you did our survey, hopefully, and it worked, you should get a text message. You too. Now, next thing I want to do is actually show you how easy it is to get a printout version. Could we go give a notification to Olga? Somewhere else? Yep, cool. And go print. Now look at this, right? It'll open up a new tab. There you go. You just print that out. It's in their native language. They can understand what's written here, and they can actually engage. Thanks. 2 degrees of separation. Everyone has actually in this.
But really, what this is, I think I really want to point out here, is that the same sort of ability to be able to see all of the factors. Like, it doesn't matter to me whether, what the agents are. What really matters is whether they're humans or whatever the problem is. It could be a particle, it could be a proton or a neutron, it doesn't matter to me. The fact is that we need to see how it kind of all works together, and that's system level thinking, and how to make something throughout all of that. And yeah, I guess that's just the story of how we moved from being a physicist to doing lots and lots of stuff. We're currently now, Thorm is doing very well. We're very lucky. We have just recently won a grant to automate detecting whales at sea using thermal cameras and computer vision. And we won a $100,000 grant for that, and we've just applied for the second stage of funding of $1 million, which is great. And this is an example of research translation again. And things that came out of this were really exciting, and using our networks that we had available here, we were able to get a thermal camera to go to Antarctica and take some data within a few weeks, and really being able to look at what sort of thermal cameras are the best things to use for a particular, heat of whale. This required physics knowledge. We needed to use the black body radiation spectrum to be able to work out what sort of radiation was going to be emitted by a whale's breath. And then we developed an infrared simulator by taking an open source one and then applying physics modeling into that, and then put that into here as well. Like, it's physics all the way down.
So our next speaker, he's a friend of mine, so Jesse, and he's a seismologist, and I think he's going to try and convince all of you to become seismologists too. So I guess with that, I'll let you explain your story. And
yeah, we'll do. Thanks so much for that. So yeah, I'm a seismologist. Might not try and talk you completely into seismology, but try and give you some thoughts. I think it's worth considering for someone who has a background in physics. So yeah, I'm a seismologist. I work at Geoscience Australia at the moment, and I just want to give you a bit of an idea of what that's like what it's like being a seismologist. And you guys have been studying seismology recently, right? You guys have been learning earthquakes and locating them using the data. No? Yes? No?
So that was a different class.
Different class.
Does that, sorry.
Okay. Multiple classes. Has anyone here felt an earthquake? No? Yes? Yeah? Was that here in Australia? Really? Was it like a big one? Or? Exactly, yeah. There's not that many big earthquakes in Australia. So this is actually an example of one of the few big ones that we actually have had. So this is from Newcastle about 30 years ago. And that's damage from a magnitude 5 earthquake that hit the city. So the truth is we don't have as many earthquakes as other countries do, but the ones that do happen sometimes cause lots of damage. So it's something that has relevance in Australia. So a little bit about me. My background is in geophysics, which is kind of like a fusion between geology and physics. And so in order to get into seismology, you don't go straight into it from high school. You'll do some other course first. So in my case, it was geophysics. And it was quite heavy in maths and physics and geology, which is the right sort of combination for seismology. Later on, I did a PhD in seismology in New Zealand, so learning a little bit about earthquakes from a place that has lots of really big ones and lots of interesting geological problems was a really good place to learn about it. And then after that, and I'll give you an example of the sorts of work that you would end up doing in a PhD, just to see if that kind of appeals to you or not. I also spent a couple years with NASA in the US, and we took those same techniques you use to learn about the Earth and we applied them to the Moon. So we reprocessed some data from the Apollo missions. And I'll give you a little example from that as well, because that was it shows you kind of two very different applications of seismology to see if it's something that you might be interested in yourselves. And since 2018, I've been working at Geoscience Australia. I've been doing a couple of different things. We have Tsunami Alert Center, so the earthquakes happen far away, but they can cause tsunamis that affect Australia, so we monitor for that in real time. And also, I do something called forensic seismology, so you're kind of looking at earthquake-like signals and trying to see if it's actually an earthquake or maybe it's something else, like a blast or special focus on nuclear tests. Because Australia signed up to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, we're monitoring all of the time to see if there's a secret underground nuclear test, and we use seismology to do that as well. So, is seismology right for me? You guys can't know that yet because I haven't told you much yet, but some things to think about. The nature of the work itself, it's very much focused on, it's very much an academic discipline. There's lots of research involved in seismology. You're doing lots of data analysis, and you're publishing the results that you have in papers. I'm not sure if you guys know much about what a scientific paper is, but a lot of work goes into it. That's basically the bread and butter of being a research scientist in any discipline. But it's definitely a big part of seismology is communicating your results in written form as well as at conferences. So that's a big part of the nature of the work of the seismologist. There's lots of office and fieldwork opportunities. So if you're someone who really likes going outside, like into the outdoors, hiking, camping, just can't stand the idea of a 9-to-5, then this is a pretty good option for you because there's just heaps of opportunities to just go out there and deploy instruments that detect earthquakes in really cool faraway places that can only be accessed by a helicopter or something. So it's pretty cool. The other end of the spectrum, if you really hate going outside and just can't imagine yourself being outdoors, that's fine too. You just do a different kind of seismology. You just sit at the computer and you can code all day and never leave the room and still have a perfectly fine career in seismology. So it's one of those few disciplines that actually caters to both kinds of people. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you can do that too. So that's something to think about. There's a couple additional reasons for you guys being Canberra locals. And one of those is that here at ANU, you just happen, just by sheer luck, to have exceptionally good school of seismology, at least at the graduate level. Seismology is normally studied not straight away at university. It's more you do it at the end as a master's or PhD. And yeah, ANU is really well regarded internationally. So it's very fortunate to have it here because, as you can imagine, being in Australia with not many local earthquakes, there's not too many need for seismologists. And it just so happens that for reasons that are beyond the scope of this talk, that they have a great school here. And so it's worth considering on that basis alone. The other reason is that in Australia, there's not too many seismologists. There's like most of them happen to be overseas in the US and like New Zealand. There's many more seismologists per capita than there are here. So it's good supply and demand characteristics. And there's some reasons against it, I'll give straight out. It's a very specialized field of work. What you do ends up being mostly of interest to other seismologists, and so that means you're quite limited geographically. It's not like the kind of career that you can pick up and go to a different city with. It's something that you kind of have to chase the opportunity. So if you're someone who is okay with going on an adventure and like leaving the country and, you know, living in Europe for a couple of years and then in the United States, if that sounds appealing, then this could work for you. If not, then there are plenty of other careers related to physics that are definitely worth considering. And the permanent positions in seismology are quite hard to find. A lot of it's academic, and it's been a long time talking about academic positions. It's very typical that you spend heaps of time basically trying to get a permanent position in academia, and that's not for everyone, basically. So those are some reasons for and against and some idea of the nature of the work, but I'll give you some examples now as to what that work actually looks like. And I'm going to use, well, those same earthquakes that you feel, you can use them for other purposes. So I use them, and many seismologists use them to look deep inside the earth and get an idea of what the structure of the earth is actually like. So one concept, I won't go too deep into it, but one concept I want to introduce is there's this technique in seismology called receiver functions. And we use this to basically produce an image beneath an earthquake sensor of what the earth is like what its structure is. And so you imagine you need a large earthquake for this method, and you can imagine how an earthquake shock wave forms, kind of like expands outwards from the earthquake itself. I have a little video here to help illustrate that. It's got the world's longest introduction. No reason. So, anyway, so an earthquake happens somewhere in the earth. You get basically an expanding circle of energy, a shock wave that's generated. So the red and the yellow are the P wave energy. It's the first arriving energy from an earthquake, and then the blue ones are the S wave energy. So that passes all the way through the Earth. And so we're looking at a cross-section of the Earth here. The middle is the Earth's core, the outside is the Earth's surface and crust. And so those seismic waves, they pass through the Earth for a long time, actually. It can take 10 minutes, half an hour to reach a seismic station. And then when they actually do, they impinge upon large geological structures. One of them is called the Moho. And the Moho, does anyone know what that means? Probably not a term you've heard so much. It's basically the base of the Earth's crust. So it's a very important layer in geology, and it's very important for us to understand that. So when your seismic energy hits the base of the Moho, it'll actually convert into different kinds of, it'll be like light when it hits a lens. Some of it gets refracted, but in the case of seismic waves, some of it also gets converted into a different kind of energy called a shear wave. And so that happens. That's what these little images here are trying to show. So there's a very slight deflection there. That's the direct P arrival, which is slightly refracted, and then you have a conversion to S waves. And you can use the timing of those to actually tell you something about the structure of the Earth. So another way of putting it, if all that went over your head, that's fine. It's not that hard of a technique. It's just not much time to do it justice. So this is basically what's produced. This is an image beneath Mexico City in this case, that those converted phases actually form this second red layer here, which is really just an image of the Moho itself. So it's an image of the base of the crust. And this is an image, assuming you know a little bit about plate tectonics. Probably not, a little bit.
Everybody should have learned about plate tectonics in year 9. Whether they remember it is another story.
All right, so when two plates collide, one goes beneath the other. That's basically it. It's very simple. And then you can see that this receiver function method has imaged the top of that subductance plate, and it's imaged the base of the Moho. So it's really cool. It's cool. It allows us to look and see what the Earth's actually doing at depth without digging up 30 kilometers beneath the surface, which is really useful for us. And so we did a study, well, actually, the previous team did a study on this first. And the person who did the study actually works here at ANU now. She's a seismologist here. And so we're in New Zealand right now. And we're in the North Island. And we're looking between two really cool volcanoes, Mount Taranaki and Mount Ruapehu. And there's something really weird going on in the crust there. And so they deployed some stations to try and understand it by imaging it using that technique I just showed you. So they deployed a number of seismometers. They are the red triangles here, so over about 100-kilometer distance, and they produced this image. So to walk you through it a little bit, the seismometers are at the top. We're looking about 120 kilometers long profile and about 80 kilometers in depth. So what we see here is that PS conversion, where it's P waves turning into shear waves, is giving us pretty coarse image of the Moho. But what's really interesting here is that there's a step in the Moho. There's a step in the Earth's crust. It's like, well, that's not typical. We don't really see that very often. But as you can probably see, you don't need to be a seismologist, but that image isn't really great. It's kind of hard to see what's going on. So we decided to try and work on improving it. So first thing we did was we reproduced the results. We just ran the same code that they used to produce this. And then we went out into the field and deployed a whole bunch of seismometers. So seismometers are instruments that detect earthquakes. And so they're the additional yellow stations from top to bottom. So we basically used them to just increase the number of measurements of receiver functions that are across this study area. And then we looked at the individual stations and had a look and see if they were recording earthquakes, because we need earthquakes to do this technique. And this is what a magnitude 6.7 earthquake from Vanuatu looks like when recorded in New Zealand. It's not much to look at, but the good thing is we can see it on all the different stations, so we know that the data is good enough for this purpose. And this is what it looks like on the ground. So for each of those sites, we would dig a hole. We just stick in a whole bunch of concrete and create like a little seismic vault in the ground. And we'll place a seismometer on it, cover it up, and leave it for 18 months. At the surface, there's a bunch of equipment that supports it. We have solar panel to provide power. We have a fence around it to keep basically livestock out, because a lot of these are deployed on farms. We have batteries to keep it powered, and yeah, it's quite a lot of work to set up a seismometer, but it has to last for a while. So these are some of the guys that helped me out in the field for that. So again, this is the previous image, and then we included a bunch more stations, and we have a better image now of the base of the crust, a lot sharper. So you can see that what looked like a step in the Moho, what looked like a really sharp change in the thickness of the crust, is actually even clearer now. So that was really interesting to us. So being scientists and having to publish this in papers and communicate our results, we had to give an interpretation. So we found out that there was also some earthquakes that occurred along with it, and we had this whole idea of what geological process would cause this to actually happen within the Earth. But I won't go into that today. But that is pretty much what typical seismic study looks like. Now, something that's not so typical is seismology applied to the moon. can't actually see it here, but I'll give you a brief introduction to lunar seismology. So in the 1960s and 70s, astronauts landed on the moon. They deployed a whole bunch of scientific instruments, including seismometers. So they had 4 seismometers on the side of the moon that you can see, all recording at the same time. And what they discovered is that the moon isn't actually quiet. It's like Earth, it has lots of moonquakes. Well, moon because of the name. They have lots of seismic events, just like we do on Earth. And in fact, they've recorded 13,000 of them. And so you get earthquakes like on Earth that are called shallow moonquakes, which are in the crust of the moon, so to speak, which are pretty standard. We still don't know why they're caused. Some people think the moon is still shrinking, and that is causing stresses that are released by these earthquakes. There's also meteorite impacts, so the moon doesn't have a protective atmosphere. It's basically any rock that gets within its gravitational field strikes the surface and causes a seismic signal. There's also these things called deep moonquakes. This is what the signals will look like over an 80-minute period. And deep moonquakes is something we don't have on Earth. They actually occur about halfway between the surface and the core, and we don't know exactly what causes them, but they're linked with the tides. So whenever we get a high or low tide here, the same forces that causes waves to rise and fall causes moonquakes, effectively. So found that to be very interesting. But in the study that I did, we actually got a hand on, well, basically there was 4 seismic missions, four missions which deployed seismometers, Apollo 12, 14, 16, and 15. But then there was an extra one there which deployed not seismometers, but another kind of instrument that can detect seismic waves, but it's not very good at doing it, called a geophone. And they had a network of 4 geophones, and I'm looking at geophone 1. And the reason I'm doing this is because they lost the data for like 40 years. It was just sitting in some tapes somewhere in some obscure area, and they only got around to digitizing it a couple of years ago. So no one's actually systematically looked through it before. So it's pretty cool to be able to go through and do that without having to go to the moon. Though that would have been pretty cool, to be honest. So we use, in this case, there's a lot of text here. This is what 14 hours of recording on a geophone looks like on the surface of the moon. Let's go back. And you can see over time, there's all these little spikes. Every one of those peaks that you see is some sort of seismic event, something with a shock wave. And we wanted to understand what they were, so we needed a program, because there's so many of them, we can't just pick them all by hand. We threw a program at it to do it for us automatically. So I'm not going to go into great detail here. What we used was basically something like smartphone voice recognition software. Instead of detecting the words that you say, like Siri might do, or Google, what's the Google one? I don't know. Google Home, or whatever. Instead of having it recognize a word, you have it recognize an earthquake. So you give it different earthquakes. And so some of the earthquakes we gave it to try and recognize look like this. And so these are called impulsive. That just is our term. It just means that the energy comes on quickly. So it's got a kind of characteristic shape about it. And we have ones called emergent down the bottom left. And those ones, the energy kind of rises over the span of a minute or so, and then gradually decays. So they look different. And then there's a kind of event in the middle called intermediate, which we're not really sure if that's actually its own thing or if it's actually just mischaracterized other events. So anyway, we ran it through the algorithm, and we made a whole bunch of detections on this 8 months of data collected on the surface of the moon. And this is what it looks like. So, trying to get my mouse here. So this is a number of detections, and then looking across here, we're looking through time. about 230 days worth of time, and each time a detection is made, it creates this bar, what's called a histogram, and so there's up to 140 of them, and they occur like this, and you can see that there's some regularity to them. There's a whole bunch that happen every month or so. Oh, that's interesting. And then we checked what happens at this time of month on the moon, and that's when the sun rises. So these are actually caused by the sun hitting the surface of the moon, and the surface of the moon just popping and causing thermal moonquakes. And then we have the same thing happening at sunset. We have another peak where there's a different pattern here, but it kind of reaches a more broad peak once a month as well, and this corresponds with sunset. So that we think that it's the sun that's actually causing most of these seismic events to occur. But if you look even more finely at the first peaks that we had, you can find that they actually separate into two smaller groups, separated by a number of hours. And these ones are particularly interesting. And we actually had some contact. We communicated with the astronaut from this mission and told him our observation. And his name is Jack Schmidt. And he said he thought one of the causes for these ones might be that there was hydrazine, which is a kind of rocket fuel, left behind in the tanks of the lunar lander. And that every day it would kind of heat up or cool down, and that would cause these events to occur. So that's what he thinks is the cause of this, but we don't know conclusively. We're still trying to figure out. There's some other theories involving maybe the geometry, the shadows. Go back here. This is the Apollo 17 landing site. You have these big hills next to it, the North and South Massive, hundreds of meters high. And it's possible that the way the shadows cast over the surface of the moon might mean that the Apollo 17 landing craft is in sun, then in shade, then in sun. So it's possible something like that's happening. We tried to model that, one of the colleagues, but we couldn't get a clear answer. So it's still a bit of an open question as to what causes them. But yeah, mindful of the time. That's an example of seismology applied in a very different sort of way. So there's all sorts of neat applications for seismology, and it within itself is quite a broad field. And I definitely recommend that anybody who has an interest, especially in maths and physics, perhaps even in geology, may wish to consider this as an opportunity for study. You don't have to think about it straight away. It's something to keep at the back of your mind to see if it might be something that you like, that appeals to you. Yeah, thanks very much for your time.
Between them and dinner. So,
right, here we go. It's up to me. Just give me like a if I need to stop. Hi, I'm John. This slide is a bit misleading, I guess. It's not what I do, but I thought it was a really nice introduction because I love this sort of thing. This was they sort of published these sorts of comics back in newspapers in the 1950s and 1960s about this brave new world we would live in. You can see it's a farm, but the corn and the tomatoes are monstrous thanks to gamma ray sprinklers which spray out radiation and make all the food grow really big. Obviously, that's not really the way that the world worked out. And you can sort of look back at that and laugh and say how little they knew. Then there's this other one. First, then we think bloodless surgery, being able to operate on someone's heart without cutting into them, using giant radiation machines. And that hits a little closer to home. We'll see why. So the field of using radiation to try and treat people's diseases, mostly cancer, I deal exclusively in radiation to treat cancer. It started back in sort of the mid-1800s. Marie Curie discovered, and her husband, Marie Curie, discovered a substance called radium. It was very expensive. You could only get tiny little amounts of it at the time. It cost like $10,000 per microgram or something ridiculous like that. The reason it was so expensive is because in order to get just that tiny bit of radioactive material, you had to go through 2 tons of stuff which you dig up from the mines just to extract that little amount. We also weren't exactly sure how to use it. the only way that the only reason they started using it for medicine was because Henri Becquerel had a substance in his pocket, and he kept it there for a few weeks, and eventually he started to notice that the flesh around his thigh got really red and itchy and flaky. And as they discovered more about radiation and what it did, they started thinking more about what sort of effects it could have. Up to here, this is a photo taken in 1905. They were using radium molds for little, I guess, pots of radium. The nurse, this is just in St. Vincent's Hospital down in Melbourne. The nurse would come out with a tray full of these little pots. We'd give them to each of the patients. The patient would hold it against their skin for a certain amount of time, put it back on the tray, come back the next day, do it until whatever growth was on your head goes away. We would definitely not recommend that these days. It is a very irresponsible way to use radiation. I would also like to take the opportunity at this point to say that, disclaimer, I'm not here representing Canberra Health Services or the ACT government. So anything that I say, don't try and hold it against them. It's just my own stupidity. So what does radiation oncology look like today? There's use of radiation oncology to treat cancer. The patient journey starts with a person who's unfortunately been given the news from their GP or what have you that they have cancer. They'd be referred on to our radiation oncology clinic, and they would have some sort of consultation with the doctor. The doctor talks them through their options and about what they think is going to be best, and what the whole treatment schedule is going to look like. Next, we need to take a 3D picture of what's inside that person. So we put them in a CT scanner, we bring them through, and we want this setup that they have on the CT scanner to represent exactly what the patient is going to look like when they're going to get their treatment. This is what the typical CT looks like for a person, not a dog. But it goes into our computer systems, our planning software, and our radiation therapy planners go through and sort of plot out what the best way to deliver this radiation to the patient is. Once that's all settled, and that's usually about 2 or 3 weeks later, we go on to radiation therapy itself. This is what I'll be talking about for most of this talk. Mostly this machine here, which we call a linear accelerator. It's pretty big in real life. I don't know if this screen does it justice, but when you go, regardless of how many times you talk to a patient, nothing quite prepares them for when they step into the room and see that giant machine standing in front of them. It's this whole arm here, this L-shaped arm, can rotate around 360 degrees. This tabletop here, there's between 3 and 6 degrees of motion. So depending on what sort of model you have, so some of them just move up, down, left, right, and then have a rotation. And that just lets that radiation beam, which comes from here, be able to access the patient from any sort of direction that you want. Some of them also have tilt controls on them as well. So just because we want to try and get this patient into exactly the same position that they were when we took the 3D picture of them, that CT scan, sometimes it's easier to just have that degree of freedom as well, rather than try and force the patient and push and prod them until they get into the right spot. These are generally fairly immunocompromised patients. They're pretty sick. They're pretty frail. A lot of them are pretty old. It's just much nicer on them if we do it this way. So what does this radiation machine look like? How does it generate its radiation? Here's a very technical diagram that I made a while ago. Unfortunately, a lot of you aren't going to be old enough to know what this is, but it's an old CRT TV cathode ray tube. It's basically an electron gun back here. It just fires electrons at this screen. The screen itself has a phospher. As the electron hits the phospher, it emits light, and depending on the pattern of light, how quickly you do it, etc., you get a picture coming out the other end. This electron gun works on basically the same principle. It's a bit bigger, it's a bit beefier, but it shoots out electrons. Instead of going to a phosphor screen, it goes into a waveguide, which is essentially just a series of metallic chambers. Inside these metallic chambers, we're shooting a microwave. This microwave is a bit stronger than the one you'd find in your kitchen. It's about 7,000 times the peak power that you can get. And that accelerates these electrons to over 99% the speed of light. I think it's the region of 99.9% the speed of light. Goes down here, comes around, is steered in a little loop by the electromagnets, and slams into this, which is a target, which is basically a chunk of copper. Doesn't get too much more complicated than that. The interesting thing here is that in order to convert a really fast electron into an X-ray through a process known as Bremsstrahlung, don't ask me to go into it, and don't ask me to repeat it again, the efficiency of the X-rays which come out is on the order of about 1%. So if you're putting in 100% energy into here, you're only getting 1% out in terms of X-rays there. And the rest of it is dispersed in the target in terms of heat. And we usually have cooling pipes and water to take the rest of that heat away. The actual pattern of the radiation is pretty uncontrolled as it comes out of the target, so we need to shape it. And this is usually done using collimators, giant chunks of tungsten. So maybe about that thick. And yeah, there's a few other devices below and a few things up here to monitor exactly how the radiation's going and all that. But that's a pretty good, I guess, overview. It's what you need to know about where the radiation comes from. Why use radiation in the first place? I hear you ask.
Why use radiation in the first place?
Thank you, Lachlan. So the way that radiation deposits dose is not what we're used to when it comes to other energy sources, I guess you would call them. Imagine if you held a lighter under, I guess someone's hand. And this is the depth in terms of how deep into the body that you're dealing with. You'd expect, close to 100% of your energy coming out of your lighter to be deposited here, and then virtually nothing more than a few millimeters deep. That heat will spread up there, but mainly you're going to end up with pretty scorched hands and not much else. Radiation is different in that most of the energy that gets deposited is somewhere around here, 1, 2, 3 centimeters, depending on how high the energy of your X-ray is. This is good because it spares anything above this 1.5 centimeters pretty nicely, but you may notice that a human body is generally bigger than 1.5 centimeters. So this isn't going to do too much if you're just delivering the same radiation beam from one angle at the whole time. Our aim in planning a radiation therapy treatment is to try and spread these beams out as much as possible to try and get as much dose to where our target is, where our cancer is, and try and minimize dose to areas outside of that, in particular areas that may be sensitive to radiation or people need to live. Here's an example. We have a very simple body. We have this U-shaped tumor, which is really usually hard to treat. And we have this spinal cord, which we want to try and spare, otherwise the person won't be able to walk. So you notice that if we deliver a single radiation beam across there, as I said, 1.5 centimeters corresponds to about that point there. The rest of this is getting a fair wash of radiation. So that's not ideal. We deliver a whole bunch of different radiation beams from different angles, and that's why that machine that I showed you, or the photo I showed you in the beginning, the giant linear accelerator arm, has to travel around an entire 300, has to be capable of delivering a radiation beam from anywhere within a 360-degree arc. It's quite an achievement when you think about it, because that whole gantry setup is probably about 3 tons or so, if you take into account not only all the equipment that you saw in there to begin with, but all of the lead shielding that has to go around it to stop any extra radiation being generated in there from shooting out into the treatment room in other places. And that all has to rotate around a point in space, which is on the order of 1 to 2 millimeters. So regardless of if you're treating from up here or down here, the center of that has to be within 1 to 2 millimeter, has to be a 1 to 2 millimeter sphere in the middle. So this is good in terms of treating the tumor that we were trying to get at. It's not so good for our spinal cord, which sort of copped a bit of collateral damage from the rest of our radiation beam. But you can see it generally it's more red in the middle, it's less red on the outside. That's sort of what we're aiming for. We can go into more fancy techniques. As time progressed, people got more and more interested in trying to optimize our radiation treatments. So if you imagine that we had a radiation beam, instead of just being a giant hulking square or circle shape, you could shape your beam so that there's this cap in the middle of it. You deliver the same, bunch of angles. You're getting, this blue sparing in the middle. You're still treating a lot of the tumor. You're not so worried about that, but you're going to maintain as much of that spinal cord function as you can. So how do we do that with this machine? With a machine which, initially was just shaped, the radiation fields were just shaped by these giant blocks of tungsten. An analogy that I like to use is a flashlight. If you have a torch and you wanted your beam of light to look kind of like this, you might do something like this. You get a piece of perspex or plastic, you color in the middle so that it's darker in the middle and maintains lightness on the outside. That's not going to do much for a radiation beam. The only way you can get less radiation in the middle is if you introduce a whole bunch more metal in the middle. So this is the way they used to do it. They used to work out exactly what sort of shape that they needed the radiation beam to be. And they used to get a giant chunk of, again, either tungsten or aluminium and mill it down until it looks something like that. Problem is that each patient is unique. Each beam that you deliver to the patient is unique depending on what their anatomy looks like. And so sometimes you'd end up with maybe 7 to 9 of these custom-made blocks per patient. Every time that you need to change the beam, you have to go in, you have to take that block away, you have to put the next one in, you have to make sure you really make sure you don't mix them up. You're delivering exactly the right block, oriented in the right direction for the right patient every time. So not ideal. A more efficient way of doing it would be to make those giant tungsten blocks, make a version of them, but make them into what we call leads. So much thinner versions of those tungsten blocks you can stack against one another, and you can control those remotely and automatically. This becomes more complicated because you need a computer to try and work out what each of these patterns should look like. But in terms of efficiency and in terms of effectiveness of the treatment, it becomes much better. And then you can take that another step further. Since you've already got a computer trying to work out what each of these patterns are looking like, and you've got a computer controlling what these leaves, how these leaves are moving, why would you do static angles when you can spread out your radiation beam over the entire patient and have your computer control exactly where each of the leaves go at every single point in that arc, and you get a much nicer distribution. Not only much nicer, but much faster as well, because you've only got this continuous arc going from one end to the other. I'll show you what that looks like in our planning software. So here's that same patient we showed you before. Each of these shapes this is a 2D representation of a 3D blob that the radiation oncologist, the doctor, has gone in and contoured to try and determine what exactly we need to treat and exactly how much radiation we need to deliver to it. And then also things like the spinal cord here, and I'm trying to limit the amount of radiation that goes to that. We feed all that information to the computer, we let it process for a bit, and it comes out with something like this. So that's sort of what the machine would be doing. And this is a view that we call the beam's eye view. So imagine if you were looking directly down the barrel, as it were, of onto the patient of what you were treating. This is what the leaves would look like as they move. it suddenly switches from one to the other because the best way of delivering this treatment is in two arcs rather than just a single arc. That's by the by, don't worry about that. And then this is what the radiation distribution looks like afterwards. So it's good. We're getting a lot of red in this bit that we want. We're getting some yellow in the bit that we want it to be yellow. And we're getting blue everywhere else. And in particular, we're trying to avoid, it's very blue here, and there's some green over here, but all of the blue is here in the spinal cord. And blue's good because blue is colder or less radiation. So I'm talking a lot in abstract terms about, delivering amounts of radiation. My job as a medical physicist is to deal with, quantifying this radiation and how we measure it and making sure that whatever we've determined is, a amount of radiation is the amount that we deliver. We describe radiation, I guess. We measure radiation in a unit called a gray. And a typical radiation treatment is on the order of 2 gray per day. So a patient usually gets 2 gray per day for about 30 days. So a gray is equal to 1 joule per kilogram to tissue. That is our definition of what 1 gray is. Lachlan, can you come back again?
Yes, I can.
So, give me a hand here.
Okay.
Give me your hand.
Okay.
I'm going to say that's, if we account for, variations in his hand, let's say that's 15 centimeters worth of hand.
Okay.
Let's say that's about 3 centimeters deep. And let's say that's 10 centimeters across.
Okay.
And that's very convenient because that's what I've written here. So, if we imagine that your hand is, this block, which is 15 by 3 by 10 centimeters, that represents about half a kilogram of tissue. So, stay here. Oh. So, if we wanted to deliver 2 gray per day to Lachlan's hand, that represents 1 joule per day. So 2 divided by half. No, 2 times half. You get it. So 1 joule per day delivered to that hand. To put that in some sort of context, gravitational potential energy, as you probably know, mass times gravitational constant times height. Gravitational constant, 9.8, that's fine, that's acceleration. So if, for instance, we had a mass, which was half a kilogram, we wanted to deliver 1 joule, and the acceleration is 9.8, then that means height is about 0.2 meters.
So that's enough energy to lift my hand 20 centimeters.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is if we have some pasta, which is, 500 grams worth of pasta, and Lachlan's hand was, say, on that table, and this pasta was, say, 20 centimeters above the table, and if I let go of this, all of that energy is going to go into Lachlan's hand. How do you feel?
Okay.
It's not a lot of energy, is it? I think even that, every day, come back here, do it again, 30 days. If you had cancer in your hand, I don't think that would heal it, would it?
Well, only because it was spread out over the whole hand.
That's right. A lot of the energy didn't go into directly wherever the tumor was. It went into sound, it went into vibration, it went negligible amount into heat, I guess. But the point is, in terms of energy deposition as a result of radiation, it's not a lot. Thanks, Lucky.
No problem.
To put that in in some other context, the heat capacity of water, i.e. how much energy it takes to heat a kilogram of water by 1 degree, is 4,200 joules. So we're delivering 1 joule to, well, half a kilogram. But you get the idea. It's orders of magnitude higher. So why does radiation have this effect that my bag of pasta doesn't? The reason, the explanation lies in how radiation deposits energy and what that does to cells as opposed to, I guess, boxes of water. So the way the radiation interacts with cells themselves in biology, sorry, this is going into biology. It's not my strong suit, and again, it's not why we're here, but it's sort of necessary. So the radiation itself can have direct impact on DNA, which is in the cell, or it can ionize something around it, some molecule, usually water. Human body is mostly water, but it could be some other sort of carrier molecule which is present in the cell. And that can also have knock-on effects and damage your DNA. Once you have damaged DNA, the pathway gets complicated and messy and in the biology space, which is outside the physics space. But the take-home message is either the cell will repair itself, your DNA is damaged, but the programming is such that it can successfully repair itself. If it's a cancer, it's bad because it didn't get rid of the cancer, but 30 more days, hopefully, eventually, one of the bits of radiation will eventually cause that cell to die, or it will attempt to repair itself. It won't be able to do it. It'll lead on to cell death, and that's good if it's a cancer. If it's normal tissue, that's bad, but hopefully the stem cells around it, the human body can repair the cells which are taken out that way. And we're trying to minimize the amount of healthy cells that are being damaged by the radiation by the techniques we saw earlier. The third option is that the cell survives, albeit in a mutated state. And that's doubly bad. It's doubly bad because it means that it's going to, if it's prolific, if it goes on and is able to divide, if it's healthy, able to divide successfully, able to spread itself, that just means you've got another cancer. That's how cancer is induced by radiation. It's this weird paradox that radiation causes cancer. We can also use radiation to cure cancer. I guess it's also the mechanism by which a lot of comic books and movies say that people can get superpowers. If you've got a mutant cell, it can do some things that your normal cells can't. But this is, a single cell, an event. It's not going to manifest itself on that scale in a person unless all of your cells have that same mutation. So I'll bring it to a close. I think I'm running out of time. We're coming back to this. The picture of the future, where we can remotely treat a heart without having to cut inside someone using these giant radiation machines. And we cut to this, which is a treatment plan for, this is a non-cancer indication. This is probably someone whose heart doesn't beat regularly. There's some sort of defect in terms of a nerve which goes into the heart. And so the best way of trying to resolve those heart synchronization issues is to eliminate that nerve. And the best way of doing that remotely without causing too much trauma to the person and specifically to their heart, they found in this case, was to use radiation. There was even a paper I saw, which is not where this publication is from, but where it was a physics professor in Sydney, Professor Paul Keel, who managed to hook up the radiation machine to an ECG monitor. And the point of that is you only deliver the radiation while the heart is in a certain, I guess, phase of its beat. So you can get to the precision where you can only deliver radiation in between heartbeats. And I think that is pretty amazing. So what does I'll close up with sort of talking about what the people who are in the radiation oncology department and the different roles we play. So I explained the radiation oncologist before. They're a medical doctor. They have medical training, but they specialize in cancer, specifically the treating of radiation with cancer. Their role is mostly in patient liaison. They're responsible for the medical side of the patient's treatment. They work out exactly how much radiation this person needs, where they should deliver it to. And the crucial role here is being able to delineate in that CT scan where cancer is and where it is not. Everything flows on from that. Everything is based on that contour. If the doctor says this is what we're treating, then that's what we're aiming to treat. Ultimately, they bear final responsibility for the outcome of the patient. That doesn't mean that it's all their fault if something goes wrong, but it means that from a legal and a moral standpoint, they see themselves as ultimately responsible for what happens to that patient. Sorry to repeat myself. A medical physicist, that's sort of where I am. They have more of a science background, more of a physics background specifically, and they have to dabble a little bit in anatomy and biology. But then they specialize mainly in radiation physics and how that especially affects materials and the human body. We're responsible mainly for commissioning of the machines, so making sure that whatever the machine is set up to do is what it can do, and whatever is in that simulation software is what we're delivering. And then QA is quality assurance. We're making sure that the machine doesn't drift over time. There isn't some sort of degradation in all the internal bits and pieces. Radiation is generally really hard to measure. There's not one magic device which you can stick under a radiation beam and say, right, that's how much radiation we get. There's all sorts of complicating factors around it, enough to justify me having a job. We get consulted a lot on different special cases. In particular, things like, a patient's got metal prostheses in their hips. How's radiation going to deal with that? How is our planning software going to simulate that? Is that going to be accurate? What's the best way of approaching this? So it's important that we get involved in those sorts of conversations, even if they're mostly of a medical nature. There's still a lot of radiation involved. And finally, the final part is about safety and education. So education, sort of making people aware of what radiation is and what it can do and what it can't do. That goes for our radiation oncology team, but also patients themselves if they ask for it, members of the public who happen to be visiting patients, carers and families, that sort of thing. And also safety, making sure that all of the appropriate radiation shielding is in place, making sure that each staff member has a radiation badge and is not receiving a substantial amount of radiation throughout their working life. The final, key player in this team is the radiation therapist, and they're the real frontline workers. So they mainly have an allied health background. They do a degree which is specifically tailored to the radiation therapy role. Sometimes they get to it from a medical science background or even just a general science background, and then do a master's course in radiation therapy. But they're the ones who deal with the patients on a day-to-day basis whenever they show up for their treatments. They're the ones who are planning the radiation treatments on the simulation software. And they're the ones who are making sure the patients are set up correctly on the machines. And they're the ones who are pushing the button to make sure that the machine delivers that radiation. So there's scope for a whole bunch of different types of roles in a radiation oncology department, and also types of people. There are also crucial health professionals outside of that in terms of nursing, dietitians, social work, etc. If any of you are interested in one of these roles or interested in a career in the radiation oncology sector, come talk to me. Or there's a handy website, a career in radiationoncology.com.au.